Okay, so we'll call this Public Safety Committee meeting to order. I have a couple of things to announce before we get started. First is to notify everyone that the public portion of this meeting is being recorded. So anything you say will be part of the record. I have a somewhat brief statement to read. So hopefully it can alleviate some concerns. So let's start with letting everyone know that there's no agenda here. This committee and the board have no agenda with regards to the Hortonville Police Department. This is not a meeting to decide the future of the Hortonville Police Department. It is simply a meeting to hear about one of the options that may be available. My goal is to be as educated as possible before making any decisions, and then to make the decision that's best, that provides the best service for Hortonville Village residents. I, not Jeannie Belial or anyone else, like has been sent out in a recent email, asked for the county to come in and give us the presentation on the services they can provide. The current police contract with the Hortonville PD is up for renewal this year, the end of this year. Whenever the board spends the village's money, we are expected to do it wisely. That means fact-finding and investigating all alternatives. As an example, we recently got a $2,500 quote to inspect the dam on Nash Street. Even though we were told this was the best price and was even better than last year's inspection price, we still went out and got another quote to ensure that we were doing our due diligence with the residents' tax dollars. The police enforcement cost for Hortonville is more than 300 times the cost of that dam inspection. It is prudent to do our research before accepting that we have been given the best offer available. We have just started this process, and this is the first meeting to discuss the topic. As residents, your opinions matter. Feel free to express your preference and reasoning to any and all board members. Your opinions help us make decisions that align with Hortonville residents. Residents' preferences are part of the process. Research and information gathering is also part of the process. Please sign up to speak if you want to be heard. Please refrain from comments and questions during the presentation. Please be respectful of the speakers and the committee members. When you speak, give your name and address. The time for you to speak is meant for you to present your preferences on this topic to the committee. It is not meant as a question and answer or discussion period. Thank you. The second item in the agenda.
Over here, Jim?
Yes, the sign up is right over there. Second item on the agenda is the Outagamie County Sheriff's Office contract proposal.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sheriff Clint Crewell. I have along with me tonight Captain Jeff Dietzen. He's captain of our operations. We have Lieutenant Travis Linskins. He's lieutenant of our patrol division. Lieutenant Ryan Carpenter in charge of our investigative unit, and we have Chief Deputy Corey Visa. I believe all of you guys have a packet. To avoid any over talking on our side and stepping over top of each other, Captain Jeff Dietzen is going to do all the talking and the presentation of our services and what we can provide to the village.
I don't know if it's easier, can you hear me good with my mask on if I step over there far enough away, if that's easier for everybody to hear?
I can hear fine.
I can hear you
Good?
just fine. Yep.
Perfect. Like I mentioned at this presentation, I'm kind of going to go over a summary of our agency in general, so you realize the services we offer and some differences. What I do want to do is save kind of the questions for the end. If you have questions, please ask. I think that's an important part of the process here. Afterwards, definitely ask questions. I know the board was given a packet. The new packet contains a few changes in there. One to be the SWAT end of it, I'll go over that, and there's a change on the cell phone cost. So we wanted to just be extensive and as transparent as we could in there, and I'll kind of go over that afterwards. What I want to cover is our agency as a department. So obviously the Sheriff's Office is a little bit unique. We cover all of Outagamie County. We also include a correction division, communication division, transport division, our investigative division, special units, and our patrol division. It's made up of currently 71 full-time officers, 24 part-time officers that handle those duties. We also do security at the airport and the main campus of the downtown county building. One of the things with law enforcement that's very important in today's world as far as liability is concerned is the training process. At the department, we have specialized trainers in pretty much every area of law enforcement, from field training officers that are certified to firearms instructors, DAT instructors, emergency vehicle operation, taser, and the list goes on, each of those disciplines, including now a mental health professional. I should say that a mental health officer that's trained in certain options for behavioral health issues throughout the county. So it really directs some services, which I'll go over in a little bit. Our training starts with the 720-hour academy, which all law enforcement does. They must graduate from that academy. And then they're certified as a law enforcement officer in Wisconsin. After that, training varies from department to department. Our department has a 14-week training process. So that officer meets with a primary, they start off, they're actually training that first day. So they do an orientation for 3 days, is a use of force training, scenario-based training. They go over our use of force policies, they make sure they understand them. So we start off that first 3-day training with all our officers. That's important to make sure they set and know the tone of our agency and our department, understand our missions and values, and then they move into a 14-week training process. From there, they're given 3 FTOs, each of them steps. It's a step 1, step 2, and step 3. During that, they're analyzed the entire time. At the final stages of that training, they're given 2 weeks of shadow. After that shadowing, if they make it through that, they're also given 6 months, or excuse me, a year of probation after that training. And they're constantly evaluated by their instructors, by our use of force instructors. Their body cameras are regularly reviewed to make sure they're acting in the proper manner, they're treating our citizens with respect. Any use of force issues are also reviewed by use of force instructor, their primary supervisor, the field training officer, and one of the management team. So we take our use of force, we had 81 incidents last year. We track all of our use of force, even when we present the weapon, present the baton, we track those, we look at them, we analyze them to make sure we're handling our situations properly. What's handled in the contract also, in that price, is all the equipment. And that includes everything an officer carries, from their uniform, their duty armor, their vest, their belt, everything that they carry. Their days of recertification, all the recertifications that come with that, their annual firearms recertification, all the training that's required, everything that they carry on their person and in their squad car is covered. We also always have a supervisor on duty, a patrol supervisor working patrol out on the road that's readily available. And we have one of our management team that's always on call, 24/7. So they're available by phone. With all of our contract positions all have, whether it's the clerk themselves or a representative has our phone number, they can contact us 24/7. If something's going on in your community and you want to know what's going on and what we're doing, we get calls all the time. With that also comes a liaison. So not only are you going to get that support on a 24/7 basis, you're also going to be assigned a liaison with the sheriff's office. Currently that's Lieutenant Travis Linskins. What he does is make sure that we're meeting the needs of the town, make sure that the officers are reporting back on a weekly or at least monthly basis. We also attend quarterly meetings to give you updates on a financial end and on what's going on in the community. That communication is really key. He also is involved, that liaison is involved in the interview process, so you're not just given 6 officers. That doesn't mean this always happens, but if officers apply for that contract position, there's a selection process that takes place, and the town or village is also involved in that process and selection process. It also includes all clerical work. So as you know, clerical work, from open records requests to citizen complaints to DA referrals, or every investigation that comes in, the clerks have to put a packet together, refer that to the district attorney's office. Any requests that come from the crime lab go to our evidence text. The clerks handle all that. They also handle any calls that come in or general questions. That's only during business hours. After hours, our patrol supervisors handle that. Evidence management supplies. In today's world, the digital world has changed a lot. With body cams and everything else, we store an average of about 10 hours of video a day through corrections and patrol. A little bit heavier than that depending on what's going on, but that's our average. Pieces of evidence we get about 12,000 pieces of evidence that we process a year. We store that, we take care of the management of it, the destruction of it, the return of it, the disposition of it, and track all that. The squad car itself, the squad car is all inclusive as well. That price for the lease is $515 a month. That includes everything on the squad, from the data to the data computer, the squad, the lights, the cones, the flares, everything that's in that car, that's included in that. That's insurance. From a liability standpoint, what's above and beyond that there, and I can go through this a little bit more detail later, is the maintenance and fuel. The fuel estimate in there I think is a little high. We want to offer estimates in other contract positions that have a larger area to cover. So I think your fuel costs are a little bit high. We want to make that estimate based on the data we have. Technology and computer support. Software plays a big role in law enforcement. We're all part of the Stillman system, which we operate on. On the other end of it, we have connectivity, GPS issues with dispatching in our cars. So that's part of what our supervisors do, is monitor that. That IT work is also covered under this contract. So that's the idea that we have 2 full-time IT staff in the sheriff's office that just work for us and handle only sheriff's department equipment. So that's what they try to maintain and keep up. So that's also handled. I think a big one that goes falls in, especially in today's world, that's why we take our training so seriously, is liability. If you have a tragic event here, and we hope that never happens, from an officer-involved shooting or a use of force that's questionable, we take care of all of that. We take care of that investigation from start to finish. We handle the discipline. We do advise the town. If you had an Officer Smith here, or John Smith, who's involved in something, we keep you in the loop as much as we can. You keep informed on the situation. You're not gonna have an officer working in your jurisdiction that doesn't hold to our high standard. It's not gonna happen. If there's an issue that he's not, or she is not mending with your agents, with your town, with your village, we're gonna replace that individual. That's happened in the past. We have been very, very fortunate. That happens very infrequently, but it has happened. If there's an issue we can't correct on our side, that officer will be replaced. Building space, the reality is we don't need a ton of building space. We do like a little bit of a interview room and an office area with a computer so we can interview the citizens. We can talk to them, we can meet for certain meetings. We don't need a ton of room. A small office area is good. The reality is we encourage our officers to do everything in our car. The car is the office. We want them out in the community working, meet with the community, not in the office. Another thing, part of the software end, is a community dashboard. If a citizen has a complaint, for instance, simple as a stop sign violation in front of your house, a speeding complaint, you can actually go onto our community dashboard. It's a way for you as a citizen to see what's being done in your community. So if an officer checks out that area and does a traffic stop, or anything along those lines, it's called a heat map. So it doesn't put it right on the dot, it puts everything mid-block. So if you had a sexual assault at 123 Main Street, what we do is try to categorize them together, and it's not going to be exactly on pinpoint on that address. It's more of a mid-block issue, but you know what's going on in your community. That's part of the program and software we purchased. Investigative staff, I think this is a big one as well. We have a lot of experience in our investigative unit. Lieutenant Carpenter oversees our investigative unit. We have several specialty disciplines. They handle about 600 to 700 criminal investigations a year. They range obviously from homicide down to just your simple fraud. The investigators specialize in certain areas, from internet crimes against children to sex crimes, sexual assaults, abuse of children, family domestic matters, white collar crimes, financial crimes, computer analysis. So we do deal with all that in-house. What's nice about that is you're ensured that whoever responds to your house, that officer has direct contact and communication with our investigative team, and they relay that information. They communicate on a regular basis. So you're not having to go to another agency to do something. It's all in-house at our agency. We have 12 investigators assigned to investigations, an additional 9 law enforcement specialists that are assigned out on the road with specialized training. Part of them investigations as well is narcotics investigation and also a non-uniformed special investigative unit. We do that cooperatively with the city of Appleton. We have 2 officers in there that handle complaints that may be drug related, they may be nuisance related, something where you can't have a uniform officer do that. These are the officers we assign to handle those complaints. Our agency also handles a lot of the public safety training across the county, and even regionally. When it comes to active shooter training or large incident response, rescue task force training, most of the time we're doing that training throughout the county, so that consistency and continuity throughout that is important, just like it is in investigations. Communication is key. If you look at it from a standpoint of what's going on right now in Freedom, may occur here in Hortonville as well. Criminals don't know jurisdictional lines, so they cross over quite a bit. And that communication, I think, in our own agency as well has increased. What we did a few years ago is they changed their schedule to a 5-on, 3-off. It allows for 50 minutes of overlap. During that time, they have resume with their supervisors. We also have squad roll call room where we display this information so the officers are aware of it. Every Monday, they're required to come to 50 minutes of training during that shift overlap. Sometimes it does go a little shorter than that, but they're informed. Or it's a little training session. It saves on money, so we don't have to pay overtime for training. It's during their regular scheduled shifts. And also what that does is keep that training up to date and frequent, so they're aware of it. And during that time, we also do informational sharing. If the investigative team is working on a larger case, they may come in and give a briefing on it, so all our officers are aware of what to look for. And I think the biggest thing is you gotta take away this is a partnership. This is not something we're coming in, it's a partnership with that community. Every one of the communities we contract with do have unique needs. Some individuals think that speeding on a certain street is important. That's what we focus on then. We work as a partnership with that community. Specialized units, which you may think don't play into the fact what we provide those services now, right? Our bomb squad, our ERT, our SWAT team, our dive team, our canines. We both have explosive detection and drug detection or narcotic detection canines, track canines, and we just sent two new dogs to school for patrol work, which is more of apprehension work. Accident reconstruction or crime scene reconstruction, and honor guard. You wonder how that plays into Hortonville? With policing, it's very hard to recruit people and retention. I think we do a very good job of that at Audi Gaming. Our turnover rate's not real high. We get very good quality officers. That doesn't mean during the training process we don't wash any out. That does occur. From the hiring process on, what used to be in any jurisdiction, you get a pool of applicants of several hundred a week. We're down now to probably narrow it down to under 25 quality candidates a month. And we narrow that list down. That's after narrowing that list down. We screen a lot of candidates. Out of that list, we're lucky if less than 10% make it to the first interview process, which is a written test, a screening, initial interview. They go back on from there to have a panel interview with some investigators, some management team, some of our patrol officers to make sure they have the right ideas, the right moral compass. From there, they move on, if they pass that, to a background investigation. It's not something where somebody just runs a criminal history. They do an extensive background, which takes a few weeks. They visit their home, they visit their neighbors, they visit their college roommates. They look at their social media. They visit, you could be a neighbor 20 years ago, we might be visiting them. After they put that packet together, they're referred for a final interview. We do our final interview and panel. From there, they're given a conditional officer based on a psychological exam and a physical agility test. Once that physical is passed, they do move on. I talked about our 3 days of original training. They still have to pass that and show that during them scenarios, they can perform adequately. That's why that's so important to have a specialized team for retention. And it's also something where they bring that training back to that daily patrol function. Our SWAT and ERT officers, which is the emergency response team, they bring that training to that daily function. They know how to respond to calls out of a high tension area. They know how to diffuse situations, and we don't get as many ERT or SWAT calls anymore as we used to. Our officers are a lot better at diffusing those situations. Something else in the last 2 years we do is we have a behavioral health officer. He's assigned to the investigative unit. What he does is analyze cases actually across the county, but communicates very well with our officers of special needs individuals that are in the community, that law enforcement first responders know how to properly respond to that house, to de-escalate that situation. They also are a liaison with the district attorney's office to review cases. If there's an individual that was referred and maybe it's a behavioral health issue versus a criminal issue, they'll reroute that individual to the proper resources. So we're not bogging down our criminal justice system with that or your community. We try to get them the help they need. I think that's really a very quick summary of our agency as a whole and what we have to offer. In the packet there, you're going to kind of see some numbers, and I'll go over those real briefly. If you have any questions, please let me know afterwards. But for the most part, it was offered as a 24/7 coverage is what the idea was to present on this. Our patrol unit works as a 5-3. It's 5 on, 3 off. With that, you do get an overlap day on the first and last day. I'm going to tell you, analyzing it, this community does not need 2 officers on at one time. That's not what we're trying to advertise here. Our schedule mends very well with our training program. That overlap allows flexing with those officers. It allows them to take 4-hour flexes on shifts each way when that double up happens and there's a vacancy for training. So that's a specialized training, the annual recert, or our regular firearms certification or firearms training. It was just quarterly. So what that does is allow some flexibility there. With that 5-3-2, I know if you look at the overtime there, I'd say anybody would say that $1,000 roughly per officer looks very low. We base that historically on all our contract positions. Our contract positions, our officers do like to take some comp time. Our comp time is earned hour for hour, so they work an hour of overtime for a special event here in Hortonville or a major incident. They're going to get an hour of comp for that, which they can take on those double up days that don't cause overtime. So it is a bit of a savings on the village as well, potentially. There is other opportunities during those double up days to maybe focus on a special area of need. Maybe you have a drug house in the area that wants something to focus on, and our SIU unit wants another officer to join them in investigating that. That officer could dress down that day, grab some of our non-uniformed officers and some of our non-marked cars and go sit in that area and do some active patrol or saturation patrols. I guess I covered everything pretty quickly. Please ask questions, because I think we get more from that, so any questions at all?
The training that you started out with in your report here, isn't that required of all departments? I mean, what, for Chris's department or Kayakton or wherever they got a department, isn't that same type of training required for them?
The original 720-hour recruit academy is required. All additional training really varies from agency to agency, and I don't want to speak for the chief, what her training program is like, or for Shacton. I know it does vary. A lot of jurisdictions by us vary from anywhere from 3 days of in-car training or on-duty training to our 14-week program. I don't know too many longer than that 14-week program. What's important too is what they experience during that training. We try to get our officers experienced and exposed to everything they can during that training period. And if they don't, what we do is we do isolation with them. Let's say they were never exposed, a domestic might be realistic, but let's say they never been exposed to a child sexual assault. What we'll do is we'll take them and we'll write them through an isolation drill with that, so to make sure they know what they're doing. So we are very thorough in our training. So I can't speak to what necessarily every jurisdiction does, but only the 720-hour training academy or certification is universal. Everything else would be different once you get to an agency.
And as far as your specialty units, wouldn't that be available to us anyhow if we needed them?
Absolutely. So the SWAT team, if you had an incident here today, or a bomb incident where you wanted them to come out, yes. The answer is yes. I think where the increased amount of service there comes is that communication with that. If we work directly with our narcotics investigators on a daily basis, our uniformed officers stay informed, and our officers as well, so they know what to look for. So it's that communication that's key, and being on the same page for that. So whether that's in a SWAT operation or a bomb squad operation, not necessarily, but I'll let all those specialty units from investigations, the idea that somewhere in Freedom there could be a burglary out there, your house is burglarized and we can put those pieces together a lot easier, being one agency, and being throughout those different jurisdictions. So that's kind of the advantage, I believe.
Well, the first one you mentioned was the drug stuff, and I think Chris and her department, knowing Hortonville well enough, wouldn't need the extra communications other than if they needed help, they could communicate what they have gotten with your narcotics unit. I mean, I don't think it needs to be a daily thing, just because our officers know the village.
Without a doubt, I think your officers would know the village better than I would, being an administrator in my office, but our drug unit knows about, not every drug dealer house is a red blinking dot and easy to locate. I'm not saying your officers locally don't know that. I'm not speaking to that. Some of our bigger investigations do lead to drug houses in areas, human trafficking in areas that we didn't know existed, and the communities that are, whether that's the city, a smaller jurisdiction, a larger jurisdiction, unless you have them, I'll call it undercovered or non-uniformed, working with confidential informants and sharing that information, it's very difficult to locate some of these. That doesn't mean that you're not catching the street users and catching a fair amount of drugs and taking care of that. Those nuisance houses that stick out, but there's still some of that activity that's difficult to detect and investigate.
However, for your non-uniformed officers, if Chris comes through and says, we could use some help with this, your non-uniformed officers would be able to come in and do that same thing after communicating with Chris as to what the situation was, correct?
Yes, we're never gonna, you can call for help anything, we're gonna try to help as much as we can, but that communication piece, working with those officers every day, when I see, if you're the fellow officer and I see you every day in there, they're like, hey, Jimmy Smith is still dealing at 123 Main Street. All right, I'll get on it. It just has a little bit more of continuity and a little more, I believe it's just a communication piece. It's so important in investigations to
Well,
know
there's
what's going on and
71
share.
officers, they communicate, all of them, they know everybody in that 71, that they communicate that well. I work in a big plant, so I understand, okay, I can work next to Jim for a month, 2 months, and still not have communicated with him that well. You know, so to me that, when you're saying that communications, to me that it seems to lose the communication type things that Chris could provide to you as the same thing.
And I don't wanna take up too much time, but it does, if you're, like our investigators have meetings on a regular basis. Sometimes if there's a bigger investigation going on a daily basis, they get together and share that information with patrol. So that information sharing does happen more within agencies, that's the reality.
But
Trying
Chris
to
calls in
schedules
for-
is difficult.
If Chris calls in for the help, wouldn't that same communication happen at that time?
It's
Where
just,
she would be communicating with them,
we're gonna communicate the best we can, but I will say,
but it wouldn't happen on the same way as if it was your uniformed officer that asked for that help?
it is difficult, it's more difficult to share across agencies. We're not gonna let something, if we know something's going on in Hortonville, by no means, if it's dangerous, we're not gonna purposely not share that information. When it comes to investigations and getting investigators in that room that are dedicated to it, it does draw more attention to it, and I think it's more effective.
I just think Chris could communicate just as well as one of your uniformed officers with that narcotics unit. That's my opinion.
I understand.
How many different municipalities are you contracted to right now in the county?
So currently, we contract with the town of Buchanan and Combined Locks. They have a cooperative agreement. They contract for 6 officers, 24/7 coverage, and Combined Locks also has a law enforcement specialist working there that works Monday through Friday day shift. We contract with the town of Greenville for an officer. We contract school resource officers, 2 of them, with Seymour School District. We contact a school resource officer with the School District of Freedom and Shiocton, and we also have a contract with the Town of Freedom. And I would encourage anybody to reach out to those. We're not up here trying to give any false promises, we're speaking from experience and what we've seen, and I think those towns and villages are very happy with our services, so we encourage you to reach out.
One more question. Do your officers also cover our ordinances?
Yes.
If we have an ordinance violation, they would cover that?
Yes, so for all the villages and towns that we cover for contracts, we enforce all their ordinances. So in other words, a good example would be Combined Locks and Town of Buchanan. They each have ordinances unique to their village and town. We enforce them both. We're contracting, so we're gonna enforce all the ordinances. Whatever's important to that village, and obviously that's what they develop their ordinance off, is what we enforce.
So in other words, if my neighbor doesn't mow his lawn, I can call up and say, hey, we're not getting this mowed. That's an ordinance violation. They would come and take care of it?
Yes, if anything that's your ordinance in your village that is enforceable currently, would also be adopted by the sheriff's office.
Can you take a few minutes to explain to us all what the process is to fulfill the statutory requirements to potentially bring on the existing full-time officers?
So it is a bit of a process, it's not something we can sit down today and decide on. We have to bring that to our committees at the county are supportive of this, have been in the past. We have a public safety committee, we have to bring it forward to them to make sure they approve a resolution or draft a resolution in order to send that through. Finance, ledge audit, and ultimately the county board's approval. So that process has to take place. If you look at Freedom, the town of Freedom, we went through that process recently. So it is something they're familiar with. We keep our committees more or less up to speed on things. We have a feel for that. That doesn't mean everything's automatic. It does mean that we don't see any potential issues. They understand the service, they understand the increased service to the county as well, and they believe it's the best for the citizens. So that would be the process more or less in the county's end. And also a contract. Contract is not something you're held to, you're allowed to back out of a contract that's signed. I believe it's, don't quote me on the date, because I don't have it with me, I believe it's June 1st of every year, so more or less it's 6 months notification that either we're not happy with your services or you're not fulfilling our needs, and that contract can be more or less not valid, or you can back out of it, is a jurisdiction.
In the jurisdictions where you did provide these contracts and they had existing full-time officers, what percentage were hired on the sheriff's office full-time?
So that's a fairly unique question, because, again, we've been there quite a few years, I'm gonna say 20, but it might be a little bit longer than that. Combined locks, a few years now, they had Fox Valley Metro that was providing service to them, so none of their officers did apply by us. The most recent one would be Freedom, so in Freedom's situation, they had 2 full-time officers that worked there. One of the officers did apply by us. What we allowed to do with that situation is have them officers apply by us. If they pass our hiring process, we do move them to the top of the list. And that was the situation with one of the officers in Freedom. He was hired on, and I think the whole process took about a month. It was actually, he was hired on before the contract was actually signed. Yes.
So you've got 24 part-time and 71 full-time, so that's roughly 95 personnel. But then the coverage here in the village, you've got, are they 6 designated officers or deputies? Are they always going to be the same 6, or is it just sort of a rotation?
It's not a rotation after it's established. So the idea there is, once you get those 6 officers, that doesn't mean there's never gonna be a shuffle. If you take, once again, I'll repeat off history, but for instance, in Freedom, we didn't have some rollover originally, because we had a bunch of new hires come in, and that rotation came in. We're very fortunate in our new hiring day, we got a lot of officers with good experience. Most of our recent hirees, about half of them had experience of 5 to 20 years, or 18 years, I should say, experience, and came from other agencies. And that's why I speak, really, we're proud of that as a department, that we can recruit those individuals, especially during this difficult time. So it doesn't mean that every contract gets the newest officer we have. That doesn't mean that doesn't happen either. But them officers do come over with experience. Once they're in that contract, they bid for it every year. So when they get to a contract position, they bid for that in that year. And let's say a promotional process comes up and one of those officers want to change because a law enforcement specialist or an investigation spot or a school resource comes available, they can apply and someone else will be put in that position. So they're assigned, they're not floating around the county with your squads that you're leasing. Them squads don't go outside your village. I shouldn't say that. They don't patrol outside your village. They do go outside your village. For instance, they're coming down to our sheriff's office to train. Everyone's handled a little bit differently. In the county, a lot of our cars are take-home cars. We encourage that for a couple of reasons, recruitment and retention reasons. The officers take better care of the cars, and the response time for major events throughout the county. And we take the last tragic incident at the mall, how much response we got, our officers there so quickly for that major incidents. They're also not paid in the time, which is not a big thing in your village. I understand that. But if they're on a crash, our officers are, and they're done with that crash at 12:01, and they were off duty at 12:01, they're off duty. They don't get paid to down and off a squad and check it every day. They're doing that off duty. They're also doing all their maintenance on their squad in their own time. So the oil changes, they wash their car on their own, they don't pay for it. You don't pay for that as a village. They do all that maintenance on their own. When they got any tires changed, they're doing that on their own time. So that's some of that advantage there. That doesn't mean some of our contracts, like I'll speak to Buchanan again, and combined locks, some of them, they're all take-home one-to-one cars. Some officers are driving those cars throughout the county. They're not patrolling with them. If they're held over on an overtime shift, they drive them by our sheriff's office and swap those cars out.
Okay, so then kind of leading into another question regarding SRO. So the SRO, is that included in that 6, or is that a completely separate contract? I mean, I know it's a separate contract with the school district, but was that considered part of, like, there would be, when you say there's one officer on duty at a time, so like, let's say there's an officer on duty that's covering the school, does that mean that's our one officer, or does that in additional?
No, so that would be addition. So these 6 officers in this are just for the village.
Okay.
They're only assigned to the village. They're not assigned to the school. That doesn't mean obviously they wouldn't respond to the school for a major incident. That happens now. The SRO or any contract issues there would be handled by the school, and that funding would not necessarily come from any portion of the village here. That funding would come from other areas.
Do you have any reports with regards to response times? I guess I was trying to find that, and I was trying to look at the materials we were given. And as as somebody who was a first responder, that is so important to me to understand the response time to compare apples to apples
Yeah.
here. Do you have something that you could share with us?
Yeah, I can give you response times. What you're gonna find in your community, due to being, the smaller, under 3 square miles, obviously, I think you're roughly two. If you look at Buchanan being 17 and combined locks combined that for a total of 20 square miles, if you look at Freedom being about that large as well, it's difficult to compare apples to oranges there because they're gonna be inside your community patrolling. The idea is they're not in office doing admin work or doing anything else. They're in that car, we encourage them to be in that car, and they're doing reports, we're encouraging them to be in that car doing reports. That doesn't mean they never need to come and do other in-office work. It just means we encourage them to be in that car to increase that response time. So if you take one of our section cars, for instance, in section 1, which is very large, so it's the northern part of 47, west of 47, north of S, that response time is not going to be comparative because those officers are covering a large area. So comparatively, we don't have a jurisdiction this size to compare to, but relative to response time, the response time here should be much quicker due to space and distance than other jurisdictions.
Yeah, because I mean, right now we have an incredible,
I would
crazy,
believe so.
great response time because we do have that officer always in the village.
And I'm sure just like you do now, all the squad cars are gonna have AEDs in them. We're just a few squads short of that now, which is an important piece of medical equipment, but your response time here is gonna be quicker due to size. There's no, if you compare this to any of other jurisdictions, if you're not quicker here, I'd be shocked because of that distance. You only have to travel a max of a shorter distance.
And the AED thing, that's recent. I was part of the fundraising efforts that
which is
happened
excellent.
with Emmy and Jeremy and, So, just to be clear on that. But I really would like to see, like, so Town of Buchanan or combined locks, so you've got an officer, I'm assuming, in combined locks all the time? Is that part of their contract?
And officers in combined locks for Buchanan all the time.
Okay,
So the idea there is that size comes in, response deals with size and distance, obviously. Our officers aren't sitting doing paperwork at our office and responding from there. They're responding from that jurisdiction, which that size of that jurisdiction is
Okay.
comparatively much larger.
all right. So it is hard to compare. I
It is
guess.
very hard to
Okay.
compare. But I'm more than willing to provide those numbers. It will be longer, I would assume.
Okay. I have a couple questions. So you currently have floating resources around the county because that's your primary obligation, correct?
Yes.
Right, so if like, for example, with the communities that you contract with, do you, because you have a presence there already, do you shift those resources to different parts of the county to like the more rural, or do you maintain the same? I mean, because I know our current PD, relies on the county for backup for different things, right? So I'm assuming that your process would be similar, right? If it was something that required more officers. So are those resources shifted based on where you know that you already have placement of personnel?
No, there would be no difference in that service there, the backup service or the next responding officer service.
Mhm.
That would remain the same because of that. We're not gonna shift resources away from Hortonville because there's an officer here. That doesn't mean necessarily that if all of our officers are tied up, which happens now, Hortonville does come out in the county to assist us, that they won't come somewhere to assist.
Okay,
That happens very infrequently, and I could provide those numbers. That only happens during very serious calls where we pull our contract officers out of Freedom, out of Buchanan, out of combined locks. That happens, and I know Sheriff Crewell even worked in Buchanan for a number of years, and I think you were pulled out once? So never, that's to assist. That doesn't mean you didn't go into the county, that didn't mean you didn't assist neighboring jurisdictions like Fox Valley Metro or anybody else. That does happen.
so currently, occasionally I'll see a county patrol officer sitting at like Alonzo Park or something like that. So if you had a contract, so like in Buchanan and stuff, does that still occur in Buchanan? So if you had 2 officers in Buchanan, would occasionally you still have a 3rd officer that's floating, that because he's a floating resource would end up in Buchanan?
Yeah, yes, it
Okay.
does for a couple of reasons. That communication peak we talked about, and officers do meet up at times to discuss things. It does happen, our officers kind of go where the answer is yes, you're going to see that. Is it a perfect world? We don't want 3 squads parked, or 10 squads all parked in center, that's not the case.
Mhm.
But yes, you'll see no change in that, if not an increase is my assumption. You won't see a change, we don't divert resources
All right.
in that manner.
Sorry, you answered a lot of the questions I had written down already, so I'm trying to go through which ones I still have. So you mentioned the overlap, right? And you also mentioned training, and you mentioned meeting with specialty officers, right, for investigative and so forth. Where does that overlap physically occur?
The overlap physically occurs where you see it on the schedule, so that's.
No, not the
adjusted
time.
rate.
I mean, physically, is the overlap occurring inside the limits of Hortonville, or is the overlap occurring somewhere else?
Inside the limits of Hortonville.
Okay.
There are also certain situations which are advantageous, in my opinion, for the contracts, and I'll use Buchanan and combined locks again, because this happens frequently there. What we do is, if another thing that'll happen if Officer Smith gets injured, he's your officer, if we have light duty work for that officer at our agency, we supplement you and give you another officer for that period of time, so you're not paying overtime, and that officer comes and works light duty. So far, we can't guarantee that. We need that work by us. If that work doesn't occur, you would be liable for that time, but the reality is, so far, we've had that work for them that we need to get done at our agency, so they're on light duty at our agency. So it's a workers' comp issue. They're at our agency doing work, and you're getting an officer on the street again. From a standpoint of where does that overlap occur, we're never gonna pull an officer out to do another duty in a jurisdiction, minus backing up an agency for a serious call. If a serious call happens in Greenville and there's shots fired, that's no different than today. I'm sure officers are going there, or even a less serious call, but something where they need assistance. But that officer is not gonna be charged. If you happen to have a double up there, where we have a hole or something where we're paying overtime in Outagamie County, and if it's, the administration wants that, what we can do potentially to save the county money and to save your jurisdiction money, we can take that officer out of the jurisdiction to the double-up officers. There's 2 officers on during that period of time. Put them in the county, saving the county overtime and saving you that straight day wage. So I don't believe your community needs 2 officers on at one time. So that is what you look at on paper there. What you don't see in there is some of those holes in there. Our officers are required to flex 4 hours with 48 hours notice, which is required of all our vacation and comp time requests. So that overtime, brings that overtime down and encourages them to use comp. Generational differences do occur in workforce, and a lot of them like their off time. We see a lot of our guys taking comp time. A lot of our officers take comp time, which saves you as a jurisdiction money, and they can only take that on a double up day. That's the only time they can take it, on their Monday or Friday that week.
Okay. Community contact. So I've been in Hortonville on and off for quite a while. I've known some, and some other police jurisdictions where officers have been told, don't go eat where you patrol, don't, because you'll get too involved with people. I've seen in the past where officers would go to the neighboring town to go eat, and miss out on that everyday contact with individuals that aren't violating anything. Is that a policy that you guys maintain?
No, not at all. Actually, our officers are not, the officers in the village here wouldn't be allowed to leave for lunch anyway. They'd stay in their community. That doesn't mean we require them to go out to Jimmy's Cafe or John Smith's Cafe to eat, but all of our officers are part of the community. We encourage our officers, as I'm sure every agency does, and I hope our contract cars are getting out of the car, they're meeting, they're going to the parks, they're getting out of their cars, and they want to be part of the community. They're part of that community, and that's what we encourage. Our officers, if you talk about a jurisdiction, and I'll use some of the examples I used before, just like anybody that patrols an area, they know that area, they know when Jim Smith gets home, they know when that car is not right in the driveway. We do vacation checks, we do all those things, so people are aware that we're part of that community. We're gonna do that. We do that frequently.
Okay. You guys do parking enforcement and everything else as well?
Yes, we do
Okay.
parking enforcement, we log streetlights that are out, we do potholes, we do a variety of things in other jurisdictions that we contract.
Okay. Just as a general idea, how many of your officers don't make it through training? Are the ones that you start putting them in with someone else? 1 out of 100, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20? Just a ballpark.
I'll say this, I believe that our hiring process is stringent now, it helps.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that washout does happen. It happens, we've let one go pretty recently. So I'm gonna say during our interview process, that washout is 90%. I'll say we wash out. When they get to the training phase, I'm gonna say it's down to 20%. That seems high to me, maybe?
Yeah,
A little high. I think especially more recently. Definitely 10%.
Do you track the officers' locations?
The answer to that is yes and no. So we have GPS in all of our units.
Yes.
So we do track that from a standpoint there. The only time we really use that information is an officer-involved complaint. Or what we can do is we can actually map a car or shadow a car and see where they're driving. So we take a look at a community and somebody says, I'm at Jim Smith, I've never seen a cop come by. Well, hopefully that's because you're sleeping. And that deterrent factor is very important. So if you don't have anything
You're
going on.
going right where I was.
And that's very important. So when they drive by, we can realize that actually they drove by there 2 days ago. That doesn't mean if you call as a citizen the first time and say, I've never seen a cop, we're gonna automatically run that trail right away for you. But we are gonna indicate that officer do actually patrol. When's the last time you've been back there? Especially in a jurisdiction of this size, to get by, at a regular basis, the residents is very important. To know what's going on in the community, to be aware and familiar with whatever everything is, what's normal.
Okay. Is that information available upon request at some point, or?
We would share.
Not in real time, and I understand that we don't, but I mean, after the fact.
Yes.
Okay,
We track our speeds, we know everything in a car, the speed, the location. That doesn't mean at times we don't have problems with it. We just did recently this Spillman software upgrade. Some of our GPS units aren't communicating currently. We try to get them up as soon as we can. It's important to know where our officers are from an officer safety standpoint and an admin standpoint.
do you have any sort of community involvement programs that, to put a face to, outside of just the contracted enforcement times? I mean, to put a face to the, department?
If you're talking on the contract or on the county end of it, I'll kind of talk to both, but COVID actually put some restraints on everybody a little bit, but talking in general, whether that's Buchanan Safety Days or Greenville Safety Days, all those things were in that community, bike rodeos, or we actually had planned, unfortunately COVID did that, is a little, I'll call it a science fair, more or less a thing where kids can come and take fingerprints and feel like they're a detective. To get involved in a community like that, just in small groups, we're looking at different areas to be part of that community in different ways. And I think just getting out and getting to the parks, you see kids playing basketball in their driveway, you get out of the car, you make contact. So the idea is that we do have those programs. It's nothing, we have neighborhood watch programs, which I know by name kind of fell by the wayside a little bit, but just that involvement with those groups, or that's a Facebook group that we communicate with, or anybody on a regular basis. So we have those contacts. Our officers in our community meet with people on a regular basis. Tyler Van Handel and Combined Locks we attend the meetings if needed. We attend with management, like I mentioned. We also provide reports on the activities we do, along with a summary report of what goes on that week. So it's not just a report, an accident here or a damage to property here. It's kind of a summary of those main events that went on in that community. And that's shared to what's important in the future to focus on. So it is a two-way communication.
Okay, I have one last question. I mean, you're familiar with, like, local police department and what they do and what they're capable of, I'm assuming. Is there something that you can point out that, that you don't do that is commonplace with a local PD?
I'm not saying there's not anything.
Oh, I know,
Here's the example, when we talked about ordinances and different things, everything there is no difference between the sheriff's office doing the work, other than we expand our jurisdictional lines and have more resources, than that local PD doing that work. One thing I think we do take away as an advantage as well, and it's unfortunate, in today's world, I spend all my time in an office. I gave up being a cop a long time ago, because that admin work is so intensive. We have an admin team that don't get on our patrol car as much as we'd like to anymore. We want to stay connected, but unfortunately we don't get out there as much. We might only be out once a month now for a short period of time, because that admin work is so intensive. With these contracts, you're getting feet on the street. There's nobody in an office doing admin work. We're doing that admin work on our side. That volume, that scheduling, the liability, the squad car maintenance, all that stuff is peace of mind that's taken care of on us. If you have a complaint that a citizen comes in, you don't handle that complaint, you forward that complaint to us, and we let you know the resolution of it. We have a process, a formal process for all that. Complaints don't fall by the wayside now. I talked about our use of force examinations. We provide those reports to you, so you're up to date on what occurs in your community. We're not trying to call out certain individuals by name in your community, even though you may know them. We're trying to just let you know what incidents occur.
Okay.
So the idea there is, I think that's the advantage. You're taking that admin time away, that squad car maintenance, all that stuff, and putting that all in our hands. Hiring process, firing or termination if that has to occur, that can be very lengthy, as we're aware. Turnover as well. Part of that admin fee is all that turnover. You get an officer that leaves your jurisdiction or gets let go by the sheriff's office. You don't have that vacancy paying overtime. And we're gonna fill that spot as soon as we can. You're not paying the training officer for 14 weeks. You're not doing our, even if we rush a process, it's a month process to hire an officer, and that's extremely rushed. That's doing an extensive background and everything. That takes an extreme amount of man hours. Every background and hiring process probably takes an excess of, I'd say 60 to 80 hours, just the background. So it's an extensive process from start to finish.
Okay. The kinds of things that I was thinking of was, like we have the PD, right, the building, the office is right over here, so you have, because it's staffed, you have a panic room, so that's a feature that I imagine is not available, because your officers are not in an office and they're out. The other one would be, off the top of my head, and I'm sorry I didn't really think about this beforehand, but so I only have a couple of examples. One is, I know we have like an eBay or a Facebook, like site out here where, because it's a staffed facility that, and it's a known, it's a known staff facility that, it's a safe zone,
Yep.
if you want to call it that, for that type of thing. That was the kind of thing I was thinking about, is I know that there's small differences, and I just don't know what all of them are, because I'm not experienced enough, and I was hoping that, I don't mean to make you step on your own toes here.
You're not, no,
Right,
we're trying to be as
I'm
transparent.
just, yeah, and I thank you for that. I'm just trying to look for differences, to distinguish between, because you've listed a lot of very good attributes, and I'm looking for, some of the things that might be a distinguishing factors between the services.
And I think all those things you talked about, that child exchange area, eBay, Craigslist, now Facebook Marketplace, the most
Yeah.
popular, those exchange areas can still occur. That doesn't mean we want our officers sitting in that office staring at that location, whether it's camera. We're just familiar that's a public place with people coming in and out, whether that's the library area or anything else. The panic button thing, if that's still connected, we can connect some of those things right to our dispatch to go off. So that's something, an advantage too, I think. That'll get notified to the county, not just the jurisdiction. I'm not sure the notification process now or how it's
There's
hooked up, but
not just a button in there, there's also a phone that they could grab. Well,
Yeah, that's a facility. I was just looking for staffing and type of response, and looking for distinguished differences, so.
Well, if they're out on the street, it's going to be longer for them to respond than if there's an officer sitting in the
Yeah.
office over here.
I mean, with our
It might only
staffing,
be minutes, but it's still
yeah.
a longer response time.
I think because most emergencies occur in the community, that's why we want our people in the cars. We gotta be correct there.
And I have one more question from what you were talking with Jim on his questions. You had mentioned that if one of our assigned officers is on light duty, you assign another officer, but we get charged extra for that?
No, so if one of your officers get hurt on duty, it's a workers' comp issue most of the time. If we have work at our agency for them to do, which so far we have quite a bit, and I don't see any, that going away anytime quickly. We have quite a bit of work to do. That officer will come and do light duty for a period of time, and we're gonna give you an officer and not charge you. So you want that 24/7 coverage, you're not getting paid time and a half to fill that position, you're just paid that straight time wage.
Oh,
You're not paying-
I misunderstood you then, because I thought you said that there would be an extra charge for that person.
No. There's no guarantee that can occur, though. We still need that work to do at our agency.
Yeah, I know from my work, if you were on light duty, it wasn't workman's comp, it paid you, it was the company. I figured it was the same with
Same.
the sheriff's office, the county then pays, but like I said, I misunderstood you. I thought you said we would get charged extra for that officer that would step in for the light duty. So I misunderstood.
I don't have any more questions, so I've monopolized some time, so somebody else can go ahead.
Yes,
2 questions, actually. So this is the anticipated cost. If there's an increase in these costs, then how is that done? I mean, or is it, this is the set price, and this is what we pay, and if it went this much over, then are we responsible for that, or is it you eat that cost? I guess I need to understand how that contract works.
so the answer to that is, we are not making any extra money on this contract. That 5% admin fees pays for all that training equipment I talked about, clerical staff. So the idea there is, that is an estimate, but our estimates have been extremely accurate historically with combined locks, with Buchanan, with Greenville, with Freedom and Seymour now. They have been accurate. That doesn't mean that they're exactly accurate. A good example would be them are forecasted on, for instance, fringe and wage benefits are estimated there at 39.8. That includes an average of that. So we assume an average in there, just like the 3-year officer I indicate in there. That is what's historically average. If I look at Buchanan combined locks, when we give them those estimates, they have been accurate. Actually, I think Buchanan saved about 40 grand on our estimate. We try to build, we don't want to come back and charge that jurisdiction more money.
Understandable. I guess
But
my
it is
question,
possible.
my question is, like, let's say fringe benefits do go up, or something goes up in price, leasing, whatever that might be, fuel, whatever that might be. Essentially, it does come back to that municipality to pay that additional amount, correct?
Yes, if fuel would go up to $6 a gallon, extreme, but that is something.
No one
that
would
we're not-
Yeah.
That is something that we don't eat those costs, because we're not, like I said, we don't have a slush fund.
Okay,
We can't charge other taxpayers for services here in Hortonville. We have to wash those costs, so we do pass those on.
just a fair question, because it's a
It's a
contract.
very,
It's
very,
just time and material. This is
It's
a
also-
Yeah,
contract
it very
versus
much
a-
so.
versus a quote. It's a
Yeah,
time and
it's
material
an
contract.
estimate. So the other question I had was, and maybe I don't understand correctly, when you refer to 6 officers, because we have such an amazing community connection with our officers currently. I've seen youth go up to our officers, alerting them, or even just talking and discuss, and our citizens do feel comfortable going up to our officers and in a good communication if there's something not right in a neighborhood or something great going on in a neighborhood. So my question is, when I talk about these, and I know you said that there could be some rotation, I get that, but is it essentially, the idea of it is that it would be the same 6?
that is the idea, but I want to be very transparent. That is not a guarantee by any means. Lately, we've seen quite a bit of rotation, especially in that Freedom spot, because 2 SROs came out of there. In Buchanan, we had 2 officers recently for contract. That other officer was there for better than 10 years, I believe. A few of them others, so I'd say their average tenure there is fairly long. If you think about that community involvement, being part of that community I talked about,
Yeah.
that occurs in each of our jurisdictions. I can show you pictures of our officers playing drums with the special needs kids in his room, and he's making a plaque for it. In Freedom, they had that same concern, which it should be a concern,
Yeah.
that you're not gonna be part of that. They had some special needs kids. They are very pleased with our service. The idea, we're not just out there patrolling, sitting in our car in a vacant parking lot.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
just
what
think
our
of like, the increase of mental health calls. And I know that a lot of our officers, or even just us as citizens, seem to understand that there's just certain people that you keep an eye on. And I would just hope that there would be some consistency, but you've answered fairly. And I understand you can't lock in 6 people, that would be awesome if you could, but, yeah.
And
Thank
some,
you.
believe it or not, some of that turnover is healthy as well. Knowing your community and having the resources come back as an investigator knowing your community, whereas that narcotics officer investigator coming back and knowing your community. There's that connection to that community consistently with some of ours, and we see that now with some of our officers that have been longer tenure.
Mhm.
We do have some that stayed a very long time in these contracts, so
Yeah. It's the mental health, the influx of mental health situations we've had in the last year or so that concerns me.
it is huge, and I think across the county, we've seen that. Our behavioral health officers we hear them respond to calls on a regular basis now to try to work with these individuals and get them the right services, and
Yeah.
so yes, it's true.
I think one of the concerns of citizens was that we have a court. What would happen to the court? It was a big question that was asked. could you explain that?
Yep, so, the court can go either way, so you have a municipal court here. That municipal court, we can write citations, ordinance tickets, or your ordinances to any court. If you decide that you don't like your court here and want to contract with a circuit court, there are advantages and disadvantages of that as well. I think one would be your citizens travel down to the courthouse down there. Our officers, and part of our mission statement as well, getting compliance. We don't want to write a ticket on a first, second offense, but we write to your municipal court, our officers show up at your municipal court or circuit court, so the options are both there.
Also, would we know who's on a shift? Would someone know in our office, say our administrator or the board, or would we know who the officers are and what their shifts are?
Yes, so we'll give you a schedule, and we give you a schedule on a fairly regular basis. If you want that schedule on a weekly basis, not a problem. Most time it's provided on a monthly basis, and that doesn't mean it's locked in stone because something can happen, such as a sick call or a last minute training session. But you know which officers are on duty, yes. And you know their cell phone numbers. As a board, you have the supervisor's cell phone number, which is our comm center, because we wouldn't give you their schedule necessarily, because they switch quite a bit. You have our on-call staff schedule as well, so you can always get a hold of an administrator 24/7. You see 20 squads down the road and lights on and 10 things on fire. If we don't answer that first call, it means we're dealing with it, but eventually we'll respond to you.
Okay, thank you.
One more question, and I promise this will be the last one. Grants. So let's say the village, let's go back to 2013, tornado comes through Hortonville and FEMA. So in order to be eligible for some of those FEMA dollars, a lot of our documentation, even our grant writing later on for different things went through our law enforcement office. Do you do that? Or is that something that now our administration would be responsible for, but you'd help support that?
So we're gonna support it no matter what. If you look at combined locks, another example, a current one, they needed I forget the exact title, but I'll call it a emergency services or whatever, responsible person. Our officer Schutte down there, Sergeant Schutte was that individual, so he worked with that, did some of that paperwork to meet those requirements. So I think those extreme situations, we're definitely gonna work with you. The officers that you have there, that doesn't mean they're gonna go out and repair your streets. It does mean that they're gonna do the work to keep your community safe. It's the idea there, if you believe the most important thing is at that time to work on that paperwork, to help get that grant and the community back together, that doesn't mean they're gonna do non-police work. You're not gonna sit down and do certain things, but if it's in that realm of public safety, we're definitely gonna help out with it.
Okay, thank you.
The liaison manager, are those reports back to the village, whoever the contact person is, or is that emails, conversation, phone conversations, or a text, or a combination, or what do you use most of the time?
All of the above. Some of our administrators, more or less, or our board members, communicate through text, a few of them. Have a question through text is not uncommon, especially if it's not an emergency thing, we respond to that. Email is very common, and in person is very common. I think a telephone conversation is very important, to have that open communication. They're gonna attend a minimum of quarterly meetings, that's required, something we want of our management team, which doesn't sound that frequent. We also, a lot of times, like Buchanan, for instance, by locks, they have a representative from each, and that individual and officer comes to report. He's the one that develops the reports, that liaison or supervisor oversees them, and then he hands them to that jurisdiction. Some of our monthly reports are just activities, which are
Okay,
just numbers.
So there's regular report form also,
Correct.
okay.
And I did ask if someone would attend board meetings, like our chief does now, and you did say yes. So we would still be aware of everything and get all the reports and everything that we are getting now.
Yes.
Okay.
So, I have one last question, and I promise this will be my last two, just like Julie here. Changes to the contract. Okay, so if there were changes that needed to be made to, say it was determined that the coverage was excessive, or the coverage was not, needed to be increased. So an increase or decrease in coverage. How do you go about doing that? Do you have to wait until the contract ends, or is there do you have a process in place if it's determined, you know, that maybe we need to adjust something?
So on that end, if we had 6 officers hired, for instance, and we didn't have any open positions. But our open positions do happen frequently, I shouldn't say frequently, but enough during the year, that we could do that. But let's say you wanted to back off, so you thought that services, we didn't need coverage from, I'm just making up something, 3 AM to 6 AM, whatever the case is. Or you thought another schedule would be advantageous. We have a deputies association contract, more or less, we follow. I did have conversations at deputy association saying, if the village is very interested in something like this, would be willing to adjust the schedule one way or another to meet their needs? And their answer was yes, we'd work with them. That's the same with our management team. If you came forward and said, for instance, let's say you had a big fire here and you needed more protection in an area for a certain period of time. You reach out to us, we're gonna do the best we can to adjust that schedule. Our deputies follow a union contract, we can't force them outside that for overtime, but historically, they've been very good to work with us. We've had very good success with that, so some of those conversations are very easy to make modifications, as long as you understand that there's disadvantages and advantages to everything, and I think we discuss them as a group and make those changes, that wouldn't be an issue. As far as ending a contract or something like that, to lay off those 6 officers potentially or do anything like that, whatever that number would be, that's something that would take some time, and that's where that 6 months,
Yep.
I believe would come in.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? No? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to number 3, pre-registered citizens to be heard. Has anybody signed up?
There's one person. Yeah.
Yeah, what I wanted to speak of is to let people know or remember that in 2017, we went through this same process of getting quotes from the county. At that time, for 24/7 coverage, the quote was $558,000 for 4 officers, 4 full-time officers, not 6. Gotta keep that in mind that whatever the contract is now, if it's like 100,000 more, yeah, that sounds a little shaky to me that for 2 more full-time officers it'd be 100,000. And also, don't forget to take into account what we would lose. I mean, for sure we'd lose the SRO contract. That's almost $90,000 right there. The numbers that somebody showed you, Jim, was, I also put in for the tickets that we write out, that money we get back, I don't know if we'll get that back from the county. That might go to the county rather than to the village. And also for the court, he says we will still have the court, but does that money stay here with that court, or does that go to the county? I mean, those are also questions that we have to present. And that's where I came up with my roughly $200,000 estimate. To go to $300,000 was figuring on what Chris would write out for any grants, which as a village, we probably would not get those grants for money for the village. It might be for the use of the officers here in the village, but it wouldn't be something that would go into our budget for purchase of stuff. So this is just things I wanted the board to keep in mind when they discuss, when all of you discuss this, that it's not just a difference in what they're proposing for a contract compared to what our budget is. There's also monies we'll lose along the way that add up in there, so, if we get rid of our department. That's all I had to say.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else? No? Okay. So we'll move on to number 4, discussion of the Outagamie County proposal. Does anybody have anything?
Can we ask them his concern with the tickets?
Sure.
So if there are tickets written out for our ordinances or the things, the revenue that we would generate now, would that be lost, or would that go to the county, or would that stay at the village?
Revenue would still come back to all our villages and contract positions. So it doesn't go to the county at all, it goes to those officers that are contracted with your community, that revenue comes back to this community.
Unless for some reason we didn't have a court,
That would
then we would have to, then it would be a
$200,000
different,
down some.
I'm sorry?
That would have brought my $200,000 down, because I figured it would, from what I understood when I went and got the contract in, that money would have went to the county.
And this is
not
just
to
a
us.
service agreement, right? It's not, this is a service agreement, not anything different than that. It's a time and material service agreement versus a, you're taking the revenue side of the house of the process.
Correct,
You're just doing the admin side of it on our behalf.
for that 5%
Yes.
fee. On the tickets, some of the difference, and if you go into circuit court versus municipal court, that bond amount, let's say that bond amount is $50, you're still collecting that $50. If it goes through municipal court, your fees are adjusted more or less by your court to a certain degree. The fees in the circuit court are gonna be different, so they collect, there's about 4 fees on there, so it's gonna be that $50 bond amount, and don't quote me on the exact amount, is now gonna be about $150 to $175 ticket.
So the difference is really whether we keep court here or not necessarily that it's the county writing the ticket versus a local.
Correct, you're still gonna get the revenue from that bond amount.
Okay.
But, okay, you would decide though if you're gonna write a village ticket or a county ticket in any given case.
So,
And the village tickets would come through municipal court and county tickets would go to circuit court.
so part of that discussion, more or less, if that municipal court still exists, part of that discussion is more or less with the village itself. A good example would be, I'll give an example of Buchanan. All of our tickets from traffic enforcement, speed enforcement are all written municipal. So they're written so that revenue comes back to that village or town. Now, in first offense OWI, which takes a lot more work on your attorney's end, they want us to write that county circuit court. So we write that OWI first offense county circuit court. That's a decision made by your municipality. We believe in that certain circumstance, it's best to write that as a circuit court. I'm not sure, maybe your village does the same thing now, but some of the discussions are depending what your village wants. And your village attorney, obviously, so.
Thank you. Is there anything else?
Actually, one real quick question before you, sorry. So, all right, so let's look at combined locks or Buchanan or Freedom. So let's say there were 100 citations written out in a month, and I'm just using a round number. And then they changed over to county service. And I get it that it's, every day is different, but did the citations go up or down or stayed the same once that was done? I guess my thought is I know that our officers are so well versed in our ordinances that they can, survey a neighborhood and they can see, a lot of different violations. So I guess my question is, historically, did the citations go up or down or stay the same with other municipalities?
So I can reach out to Combined Locks, give you that exact answer. I know originally they did drop. If we look at numbers, your officers ran about 1,000 ordinance or citations in 2019 and 2020. 260 of those being parking tickets each year roughly. We don't write a ton of parking tickets in other jurisdictions. We can. We do that, no problem at all. That's not the case. If you take that and some of the other tickets, we write an average in Buchanan of 750 tickets a year. So you balance out that parking, we're writing them same numbers. Now, I didn't break it down necessarily by type of ordinance, whether that's the long lawn ordinance or whatever that ordinance would be. I didn't break it down that particular, but I just looked at the major differences in those citations and what the officers are writing. So it is consistent, but I don't know as far as speaking to the lost revenue in that, I'd have to reach out to Combined Locks to find out.
Can you,
Yeah.
please? I'd love to see that. Yeah.
I'm guessing it has to do in part with what the municipality wants you to do. I mean, there's what you do, right? And then there's the discussion about how we would want you to do it, for example, or how Freedom wants you to do it. It might be slightly different depending on whether it's an in-house police department or an external agency like yourself. So it sounds like it's kind of an a la carte thing. That's part of the discussion of how we want you to manage as a police.
I would hope a board though wouldn't tell an officer how, like if there's an ordinance violation, it's not up to me or any other board member.
I agree, but it sounds like there's some discussion there between the municipality and that agency about, where tickets get pushed, whether it's the county, certain things are being handle that way.
It's winter parking hours, so.
See, I'm a nose
Yeah.
in, hands off when it comes to, but there's maybe other board members who tell our officers, you know, like, hey, there's this going on, you know, type, I mean, yeah, of course, I just wanna make sure that it's clear that our board doesn't
Control.
patrol.
No,
Yeah,
agree,
that's
agree,
right.
agree.
Yeah.
They do a focus, if parking enforcement's a perfect example of that. If winter parking's an issue and there's no compliance, our officers are gonna write those tickets, they're gonna patrol all the streets, because that is what's the direction. On the other side of that, the discretion end of it, we never wanna look at an agency, we don't wanna be a police agency that's there for income. Tickets should never be a source of income, they're a source of compliance. We want our citizens to comply with their laws, and by writing a warning, if that reaches that compliance level, that's great. If it doesn't, we move on to the next step. So there is discretion there, we never wanna take that away. It shouldn't be a source of revenue, it's a consequence of it, but that's not the source of our writing tickets. We're doing it for compliance.
Well, from what, correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, but from what I'm getting what you're saying, now if a complaint comes in, it goes through Chris to the officers. What happens if you take over? Because we won't have Chris anymore. Does it go through
There's a
Nathan,
liaison.
Jane, or directly to
Direct-
somebody in your department?
Directly to the department. So the officer on duty will respond right to either a
But
phone call or
say I'm
incident.
calling about my neighbor with that. Do I call here,
So
or do I have a number to call for the county?
you call right to the county will dispatch an officer, the Hortonville officer, right to your house. So in other words, they'll come to your house, if you don't wanna be seen, just like now, they'll make a phone call or something like that, so that contact, all communications, other than for the phone directly to the PD here during office hours, go through our communication center. So that's the sheriff's office communication center, so they'll get dispatched right from there.
And probably part of that community dashboard that you said was set up, to probably monitor that to also get input.
They get input, it's not instant input though, so it's not something they can request an officer on, it's something where they get feedback of what's going on in their community. And don't quote me on that, I think it's updated every 12 hours roughly.
Okay.
The software does have issues at times, like it currently is today, but most of the time it is up and running.
One more thing for you. I recently received this, are you familiar with this report? It's a run report, I guess, of the activity from like 2019 and 2020 for?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, do you have this?
I have most of the numbers in my head, but
Okay.
I remember again stuff.
There's not a lot of explanation with this, so, I don't, I mean, some of this is self-explanatory, right? But a lot of the other stuff in here is not, even terminology I'm familiar with. Could you take a minute and go through this?
Sure, I'll grab a copy of it.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to make sure it's the right document. What we try to do is run numbers with, Hortonville's activities versus ours in like communities.
Yeah.
Just to see what's different. That's why I brought up those ticket numbers earlier,
Okay,
which I was aware of. Part of this reason is to try to establish what the needs are in the community, if we're meeting those needs or not. So if you look at that, it says 2019 total incidents.
yep,
So those are dispatch screens or incidents started by Hortonville. Just for round numbers, it's 4,035, but about 4,000. Below that are a bunch of what nature code they are. The incidents from a 911 hang-up assist, down to a welfare check or any of those, so that's just categorized that way.
okay,
So that's really a nature code of the incidents that are dispatched. Some of those are more or less self-initiative screens, like traffic safety screens. Other ones are dispatch screens, like a welfare check or a burglary or something along those lines.
okay. What is, like, because there's incidents cleared without report, incidents cleared with
Yep.
summary.
What's the difference?
So
Yeah,
what
that
I-
doesn't, yeah,
So what I tried to get there is a feel for, once again, the workload that would be on our clerical staff potentially. So in our report system, which kind of is followed out through the community, slight differences there. They can clear out a report really with no notes at all. Some just use screen notes. The next level will be kind of a summary, like I just summarized the call, think of that as paraphrasing more or less, which I think most agencies do. I can't speak to the chief's exact policy.
Okay.
But in the others, our report, think that is more of a formal report. We do that any incident where we want to document everything, which is all searchable fields. And so that's kind of the three levels really. What you're seeing there is incidents that were cleared out with a summary in Hortonville and incidents that were cleared out with a report. Then what I indicated there more or less is the reason it says, talks about the chief there, for instance, underneath the 750 or 748 incidents. The chief was primary on 16 of those incidents, cleared out with a report. Just to get an idea of the admin side of it, obviously she's, the feel here is she might be doing a lot of admin work on that side, which I can understand. I do a lot of admin work myself, so.
Okay.
Then it goes through 2019, and it kind of covers 2020 after that. The last two things under 2019 are tickets written, which are entered in the system, so our tracks dumps into our Spillman in-house system, so that's how we retrieve those records. And then it's which officers are written, the tickets are written by, or whether it's tickets or warnings.
Okay.
And I think that after that, it kind of repeats that as a 2020 statistic.
Okay.
Goes into the same things. I think there were about 4,115 incidents or nature codes taken out in 2020.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I need a motion to go into closed session.
I'll make a motion to go into closed session under state statute 19.851C, state statute 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility.
Second?
Any roll call? Julie?
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion passed. We'll take 5-minute recess to clear the room.
Cameras on.
Now I need a motion, there's no action to be discussed from closed session. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
I'll second.
Roll call.
Aye.
I'm sorry. Aye.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.